Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another awesome show for you today. It's Shaun and I hanging out together, talking about cool stuff, Radmaster 9000 kind of stuff. But before we get into any of that, I want to make sure that everybody likes, subscribes, hits the notification bell, because if you don't, then you won't get an email and you won't hear from us every day. So make sure you do that. Shaun, any thoughts? Anything on the top of your head? You guys are squamish right now?
Nope, Kelowna. That's
Kelowna.
henceforth the dramatic lighting from a single blazing white light bulb on my left flank, and the noise train underneath the door just over to my right flank, which is called the hallway.
Right on. What are you guys doing in Kelowna?
Well, Evan is gonna. We're this morning going to see the University of British Columbia Okanagan because he's going to be doing year 2, 3, and 4 of engineering here in Kelowna.
Nice. Nice. That'll be at least somewhat close to home, right?
Yeah, 3.5 hours away. Not too bad. Not too
Yeah,
bad.
that'll be
Far
sweet.
enough away that he'll have to do his own laundry.
That's critical because
Critical.
there were many people that showed up. I remember people showing up in basic that had never done laundry before.
Yeah.
So that's a skill set. Got to learn.
Madness. Yes. Did you get taught how to brush your own teeth? No, I didn't, Sergeant. All right, go back to your cave.
Hey, look at that. Carl, morning, Carl. Hope all is well. All is well. We're doing well here. He's a former infantry, PCLI. So always good to see. I actually linked up with him a little while ago. He was jumped into town. We grabbed some coffee.
Oh, nice. One of those. So he's your neck of the woods?
He is. He's out in Morinville, up
fantastic.
Just outside of town. So
we'll probably
grab coffee at some point as well. He really wanted to be.
He should be in this. He should be right now drinking coffee in your basement, having a couple of laughs.
He should be in my basement.
If you're any kind of friend, you're saying you're making all these friends, and yet what kind of poor friend are you?
I'm not.
You're the kind of friend that no one can count on. Unbelievable.
The one thing you can count on is that I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, you are doing your best, and you know what? You're doing way better than I am because I haven't even had my freaking morning coffee yet.
Ooh,
it's unbelievable.
Well, you're gonna have to rectify that. I mean, it's still early in the morning out there, so
it is.
I'll allow
for me to be drinking coffee. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'll just sit here in my hotel room staring into a freaking massive white light bulb
while talking to me.
Interrogated.
Yeah, well, maybe we could start if you really wanted to. Any thoughts? Anything off the top of your head that you want to chat about, discuss? No. Anything, or you just want to dive right in?
Interrogation.
Begin the interrogation. Oh, look at that! Carl has already had a 4-cup French press.
Oh, congratulations!
Very nice. You don't like? I remember we were talking a little while ago. You have not a big fan of the French press?
I am not, and here's why: because it creates a dirtier or muddier cup. Now, I'm sure that Carl has got it nailed. He has looked at it carefully and considered the nuance of how he likes his coffee. For me, I consider French press to be muddy. And it's due to how much time it spends just hanging out in the mud of the French press. So French press is generally speaking, quite a big particles rather than small particles when you put it through your grinder. Mm-hmm. So it creates, I don't know, it's not a clean cup, in my opinion. But what it does do very well, better than most other extraction techniques, is it gives a lot of heft, a lot of mouthfeel. So it feels like a substantial coffee in the morning due to its heft. But that isn't clarity. Clarity in a coffee cup presents a far lighter palette, so there's way less heft, and it's because of the particulates in that sort of other various forms of extraction techniques. It provides a very clear, almost like tea-like experience versus a milkshake-like experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look at that! He's I have two different types. One for fine, one for coarse. Also, temperature of water changes the cleanliness of the blend.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Particularly when you start considering whether it's a high grown coffee or a low grown coffee on a elevation basis, depending on the
Hmm.
country. And then, of course, it depends on how deep or not the roast is being taken. If it's a really really dark roast, well, I mean, who cares what the temperature is? You could brew that in a puddle on the side of the road, and it would taste the same if it's really burned coffee. But the Carl is right. Fine and coarse grind will significantly change things, as will the temperature of the water.
Yeah. I have a little French press and I have a big French press, and I have my little one is for my jet boil. So when I'm off
Oh yeah,
hunting,
yeah.
and I can do a quick French press in the morning when I'm out off on the trails, and it works quite well. But you're right,
Mhm.
it is a muddy type of coffee.
Now, I should say this, and I'm sure that Carl is aware of this because he seems like he's kind of on the program. And it comes off of a conversation I had just before we left Roslyn to come out here to Kelowna. And it was with the partner of my osteopath. And so they're heavy onto my coffee right now. They're just humongo fans. And so when I was giving him the bag, I said, listen, I roasted that on the 27th of March. It's it's a Kenyan Kiriyagi, uh, Rungedo Karamakui. How about that? Right off the top of my
It,
head.
it kind of sounds like you're making up words.
Uh, I'm just I'm just hitting it with the exclams, baby.
Yeah,
Exclams.
good old
So
exclams.
I I gave them this Kenyan and I said, hey, listen, it's going to present this, and this taste profile, but depending on how you extract it. And he says, oh, I use the Bialetti. Are you familiar with the Bialetti?
No.
It's like Italian. You kind of screw the two pieces together, put them on your stove. It looks like a little kind of stove potty kind of thing
Oh
that
yeah,
goes on
yeah, yeah.
top of the stove.
Is it kind of like a percolator but
It is kind of
smaller?
like a, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and kind
my
of like
stepdad uses one of those.
right. It's old school,
Hmm.
and that's what made me think from your comment being out on a jet boil. It's kind of old schooly jet boily kind of combo coffee
Hmm.
maker thing. Anyway, I said, hey, that's a great idea. I said, how's your coffee turning out for you? Is it good, or are you happy with it? And he said, yeah, I really like it. I do this, I do that. And I said, have you ever heard of a guy called James Hoffman? He's like, no. I said, you too. That's your next task. You're going to go find James Hoffman. He's the man. He's going to teach you a whole bunch of different things, and he'll talk about things like maybe putting a wet towel or a wet dishcloth on your Bialetti to cool it down at a certain phase of the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, James Hoffman. And so after I'd said that to him, he was like really open minded, really like, that's the first thing I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. And on the last coffee that you roasted first, and on this coffee so he had lots of questions and really good questions. And then he followed up his questions with, and I'm going to do that, Shaun. For sure, I'm going to check that out. Really open minded. So, there's people who've been drinking coffee for 20 years, have never given a thought. And even if you gave them a thought, they wouldn't listen to you because their coffee is their coffee and that's it. That's all. But this
Yeah.
dude was all over it.
Well, this is coffee's it can be a very personal thing.
And
And
it's also indicative.
indicative how?
Ah. So it can be a personal thing, as can be a lot of things. But then
True.
those can be turned into it's my thing. And now it's my way. And then it's
Mm.
the only way.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Now, well, let's start. Let's dive into coffee because I'm enjoying this conversation. I'm learning stuff
Bring
right off the
it.
bat. I'm liking it.
I don't
Um,
know much about it, but I'll give it my best effort.
I think you know a little bit, just like little tidbits that you might be able to share with us. Um, so I was always told that the darker the roast of the beans, the less caffeine there is. But what else happens? Like as you roast them, what happens to the beans themselves? How does it
Hmm.
how does it actually change them in
Yeah, it
order to
changes
make
them
different cups
quite
of
quite a
coffee?
bit. That's a good question. So as you can imagine, the beans show up green coffee beans. And depending on how high grown or low grown, by that I mean their elevation. So there's beans in Ethiopia that are really, really high growing. And so those high grown beans will also be like perhaps called natural process beans. So by natural, that means the difference is they're not washed. So you'll have natural processed, you'll have washed processed. And these are just broad generalizations. Yesterday, before we came on this trip, I had a coffee from Elkin Guzman in Colombia, and that was a hydro honey natural process. And so there's many different ways to process coffee, but we're going to keep it super simple, call it natural and washed.
Mm-hmm.
So in Ethiopia, they're really high growing. Oh, look at that's my wife. Hello, dear. No big deal. Just a podcast. It's
Live to the world.
Yeah,
I love it.
that's, welcome to my jungle. So high grown in Ethiopia, they are really, really dense beans and typically quite small beans because they're up like mega high. And they don't, when the beans are grown and when they're pulled from the shrub, they're really, really dense and contain lower moisture. So think of them like as a raisin rather than a grape, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when it comes time to roast, a high-grown Ethiopian versus a low-grown, we'll call it maybe a Hawaiian or Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, which is quite famous, not for the right reasons. It's just massive marketing way back in the 80s and 90s. Low-grown coffee, it'll be more like a grape than it will be a raisin. And when you're roasting both of those two green coffee beans, they will produce different results in the roaster. Of course, the really moist bean will start blowing off moisture, whereas the really hard, high-growing bean won't blow off as much moisture. So think of it now, a coffee bean as like this really big thing. What in it has cellular structure. So what happens when you start adding heat, that cellular matrix starts fracturing and cracking. And at a certain temperature, what'll happen is you'll hear something called first crack. And it'll be like a almost machine gun fire going off in your roaster quietly.
Yeah.
Or like a popcorn machine.
Yeah, just like a tick, 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 tick.
That's right, but it'd be quite loud.
Yeah.
First crack is quite violent.
Okay.
On the green coffee bean. And then after first crack ends, it'll come down off of first crack, and you'll have this intermediary phase between first crack and what's called second crack. Second crack is when things are starting to get, I'll call them medium roast, kind of moving out of a medium roast profile towards more of a darker roast profile. I tend to play around with my coffee roaster. Once first crack starts, then I'm dropping my temperatures, increasing my airflow in my roaster to not have what the roaster's doing is impacting the bean now with heat and smoke in a negative way. So it's at this point where you've got to be careful not to taint the coffee bean. And by that, I mean, like, my job as a roaster is different than maybe a lot of other roasters who are just trying to create as much coffee as fast as possible to the common masses, which is more dark and burned and don't really have to care about the flavor profile of the bean. Whereas I'm trying to custom roast the coffee so it presents what the farmer was trying to grow that year. So his crop will have a certain taste profile. If it's roasted really, really well, it might be like clementine, oranges. It might have some notes of lavender in it. It might have some notes of vanilla, Madagascar vanilla. It might finish off with even a little bit of sweet strawberry on the back end. So the farmer's beans that season will be able to provide some general tasting notes or cupping notes or some expectations of, if it's roasted well, it will taste like this glorious cup of coffee. But it'll never see its full potential if the roaster just like cranks up the heat, walks out, makes dinner, comes back and sees it black coffee beans and thinks, fantastic, that's coffee. But it isn't. It's a beverage that is black. that's called coffee, but it's not representative of what coffee can give you. So well roasted coffee will be able to provide an amazing cup of coffee. And by the way, just 10 seconds here or 10 seconds there on either side of what we'll call the sweet spot will create significantly different notes in the cup. So it might strip out the Madagascar vanilla bean and it might replace that with more of a clover honey. If you just go over that extra 10 seconds, instead of a sweet, pure vanilla sense, it'll morph into more of a caramelized, higher order sweetness. And what you're doing is you're kind of getting your chef on, in a sense.
That's
But
what I
that takes
was.
a lot of time, you
Yeah.
know. If you want to be Anthony Bourdain, you've got to spend 10,000 hours, flipping eggs for a little
Yeah.
while. And so, but I've been roasting for over 15 years and I've done a lot of roasts. I mean, a lot of roasts. And so I've made enough mistakes. I've drank enough coffee. I've tasted enough things that I put out a pretty good product.
I really love how you added that in the fact that the 10 seconds either way on either side of your ideal timing is
Mhm.
indicative of how you like your coffee, right? And that
Mhm.
if you want to try these particular beans in this particular style, I mean, you'd have to try it with a lighter, your
You have
that
to.
or 10
You
seconds
really
early
do.
on
Yeah.
timing, 10 seconds after, and find that
Yeah.
note and go, oh, this is the one I like, and then make sure that that's. Do you find that each every time you get a shipment in of like new beans, say from the same area, obviously each season is going to be different, right? Like you're going to get
Mhm.
slightly different flavor profiles per season.
Mhm.
But do you find that there's some generality within the beans, like that you know
Yeah.
that if you time it for 6 minutes on this particular bean from the Ethiopian side of it, these will be good to go for the most part, and then there's some fine tuning, or is it like each batch is a completely new experience?
Oh, that's a good question. So with generalities, the high grown sort of, we'll call them Ethiopian style beans versus the low grown, softer beans, I have roasting profiles for them. But I will say this, that a roasting profile for me is a generality based on, we'll call it the region or the elevation.
Okay.
But then when I'm in the moment, it's all about the black magic, baby, the dark science, feeling the bean as it were. So I roast by feel, by smell, by my senses. Of course, I can hear the bean in the roaster performing. I can smell it. I've got a little trier. So in the front of my roaster and the face of my roaster, it's called a trier. It's a little thing that you can turn,
Oh, and it's got
and
like 3 or 4 like little
that's
beans
right.
in it.
Pull out
Yeah, yeah.
some beans you can smell, look, put it back in, turn it. They drop back into the roaster, and the roaster keeps turning, and presto changes. So I can keep pulling my trier and looking, smelling. So I'm always engaging my senses when I'm roasting. Plus,
Mm,
I'm on the data.
yeah.
So I'm combining a lot of things, a lot of experience, I suppose, and my senses, and trying to interact with the coffee in a way that I think it's going to present the best representation of what the farmer was trying to do that year. And
Mm,
by the way, every year, every season, sometimes it's twice a year in growing regions. Sometimes it'll only be a once a year thing, irrespective of how many times. It's different every year. The crop is different every year because it is a lot of these places are grown like on a maybe a sun facing slope, or maybe
mm,
shaded.
yeah.
Maybe it's banana trees, or maybe it's this tree, or maybe it's whatever, something that is protecting the beans from the wind, from the moisture, from the sun, whatever the soil is doing. It's every year is very, very different, that's for sure.
Mm. What about there's a super famous kind of coffee that comes from certain, I think it's bats that eat them, and
No,
then
it's
is
a
it?
it's a civet cat.
Oh,
So it's
right.
called Kopi Luwak, Kopi,
Mm,
Luwak. Anyway, it what it is, the animal will forage through the forest to eat up these cherries and then pass them through their digestive tract, basically taking a
yeah.
dump. and then they're retrieved by local farmers. Now, here's the interesting thing about Kopi Luwak. It's, of course, it's quite expensive if it's
Mm-hmm.
authentic. And I've had the authentic Kopi Luwak, the expensive good stuff, that's legit. And I'll get to that in a sec. But I've also had the other stuff, which is basically a fake product, for lack of a better term. Now, you got to make a decision with Kopi Luwak. At one point, it was all authentic and naturally harvested through a natural process. And then many years later, once it started becoming famous, it started getting exploited. So the civet cats were being trapped, put in cages, living their whole life in cages, force-fed coffee cherries
Mm-hmm.
that then they were passing as fast as they could. And they basically use the animal to become like a coffee creating machine until
Yeah, a
it
little
died.
harvester or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, a little harvester, which is totally not cool. And
Mm-hmm.
so two different kinds of coffee processes, two different end results.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be an amazing coffee. A buddy of mine sent me some really expensive Kopi Luwak. I roasted it when we were living down in Houston, just outside of Houston, Texas. And it turned out to be one of the most amazing experiences I've had with coffee. And here's why. A buddy of mine, John, would come over every lunchtime for coffee at my place. I'd be pulling shots all the time and roasting all the time. So he knew I had this Kopi Luwak. We were just like, oh, our first real Kopi Luwak. And I roasted it. I wonder if it's going to be good. And so we pulled shots on this, and or I pulled shots on it, and then I did a little, 4 ounce. Had these little 4 ounce cups that I brought back from Vietnam, our 6 week family trip, and there we are drinking these little 4 ounces of this Kopi Luwak that I've roasted. And I gotta say, buddy, at that moment, as we both confirmed, we were the richest men in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and here's why. Because it was a Kopi Luwak sent to me, a rare coffee from a friend who'd spent a lot of money. I'd roasted it. We'd waited the perfect amount of time based on all of our coffee knowledge at that time. I pulled a perfect shot to the best of my ability after pulling tens of thousands of shots on my 3 group head machine in my coffee shop and all my own personal shots. Tens of thousands of shots later, I'm pulling a shot of Kopi Luwak for him and I with some, wait for it, raw milk, grass-fed raw milk, which was illegal at the time down in Texas. And I
Mm-hmm.
found a farmer who knew what to do. And so, I mean, a drink that was being drank by only 2 people in the world, based on all of the variables that
Oh yeah.
stacked up to create that. And as we both looked at each other, we both smiled, because it's the realization that no billionaire can buy that moment.
No.
You can craft a moment with coffee that no billionaire can have. If you find the right coffee from the right roaster and you extract it the right way, you're the only man on the planet with that cup. It can't be created. It's kind of as I see it, it's a real king's beverage that no king can have.
Yeah.
Unless the king knows how to find it. You know what I'm saying?
That's one of the, it extends into life as well, right? Like it's not
does.
just about the coffee, it's about finding that moment in time, the moment within the moment, because
Mhm.
you're utilizing all of the previous moments into this one singular moment based off of all the different elements that could coalesce and come into one thing, and then developing it and experiencing it and knowing how to experience it. That's another thing, because you
It
could be in
is.
that
It
moment,
is.
right? Somebody could just show up at your door and be like, hey man, oh, you got coffee going on? And you're like, oh sure, here's a cup of coffee, and without
What's
any
next?
knowledge, right? Exactly. And I think that's a big part of it, is not only understanding that you're part of that moment, but it's about letting yourself experience that moment as well. And I think that's an interesting lesson for a lot of people. And the fact that there's not only are there levels to the game, but that could be, who knows, the perfect cup of coffee, right? In that moment.
And that's only defined by the end user. And I got to say this, that I've been in a relentless pursuit of it ever since I heard this term, the perfect cup, which, by the way, was the motto for the coffee chain that I was involved with at one time, that then I became franchisee of the year.
You franchisee of the year? Come on, no, you would never aim for those things.
Yeah, the second cup. I've actually got a book in my library or back at home. It's called The Perfect Cup. And that it's actually referencing a coffee estate down in Costa Rica called La Manita. Doreen and I visited, and I've picked coffee beans at La Manita, and et cetera, et cetera. Oh, boring coffee stuff.
I don't know. I think that's part of the experience, right? If you can go from the beginning of a source all the way to the end user, I think that's an experience that most people in the world never get. Like,
true. And do you know what's even cool? Even cooler than that?
Sure.
I'm doing all of that. Plus, Frank Torres, a guy that I buy my coffee from down in Colombia, super cool farmer. I love Frank Torres's coffee. He freaking follows me on Instagram. And sometimes on my live chats, he'll come in and give a thumbs up or whatever, or he'll send me DMs.
Nice.
I mean, like, how weird, not how weird, how weirdly awesome is that? As I'm talking about coffee, Frank doesn't follow us over here on the collective, but if you and I were talking about coffee right now, my IG, Frank would be all over it.
Maybe I should reach out to him, see if we can get him on the collective and we can have a conversation.
He doesn't, we have to, when he hits me with DM, it's an Espanol and I have to hit the Googles to translate it. So
I guess I should start learning Spanish then.
Pick up the pace, Chance, boss.
That's I will do my best. What can I will actually I was thinking Spanish after I'm done French, so I'm working on French right now. Then we're hitting at Spanish just because why not?
I've had to learn survival Spanish because I've spent a fair bit of time down in Central and South America. So my survival Spanish wasn't bad at one point, but it's a diminishing skill. If you're not using it, it's disappearing, you know?
Yeah. Languages are really tough with that. I mean, I remember when I was in the private school a long time ago, we were learning 4 languages at the same time. And it was Yiddish and Hebrew and French and English.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And we were using it every day. So it stuck with us. But now, there's no way I'd be able to utilize any. I think I can still count to 10 in Hebrew, but that's about it, right? I got little bits and pieces. So it is a challenge. Satch says, that sounds similar to any scenario. As individuals, we can create an experience that no billionaire can acquire unless they put in the mat time, which is...
Yeah, you know, I think I have said it out loud, and certainly in my live. I don't think I've said it over here, but I love creating the situation. I love creating rarity. I try to do it every morning with my own coffee, and then I try to find other ways to do it. And I like to skill stack rarity as well. Nothing like making a cup of coffee that's like world class and maybe only cup in Canada that morning, and then jumping on a bike and riding up to single track with some hoops. I mean, skill stack things, you know what I mean? Next thing you know, you're having your own little triple billionaire lunch up on some single track that people would fly in anywhere to go and ride. You know what I mean? So got to skill stack that stuff.
This is part of the moments, right? When I'm hunting, and I bring up my wife made me some borscht for last year, and so it was really delicious. I had some really great bread that had just kind of hardened on the trip down there, so the outside was nice and crunchy, and I was sitting there at the base of the mountains, just like staring at the mountains by myself, eating this borscht with great bread. And those moments, no one else can have, right? Unless you're there in that moment. And I think that's, as you said, skill stacking. If you get some good food or some good people or some good times, or what was it? Seb came out to Edmonton a little while ago. And him and I linked up, and we were at a cigar bar, and we were sitting there smoking cigars and had a dinner, and there was fires going, and we had these great conversation. Again, those moments, unless you are actively involved in them, can just disappear. They can just become
Do you want to hear something funny?
Sure.
So, Seb doesn't know this. He probably never will know this because he won't listen to this. But too bad for him. So, something funny when Seb came to town, and it was when we were doing the 1 week. He hung out in Rossland, and we captured about 25 hours of audio as part of that process. So Tanya was in town, Super Cyan magical girl, and she wanted to shoot some photos. So Seb said, "Well, let's go get some photos out on, out in the forest, out in your mountains here in Roslyn." I said, "Oh, I've got the perfect place," because at that time his leg was a bit crunked up, and I didn't want him walking too far. So I took him up. We drove up. We got out and walked about maybe 3 minutes down a tiny little trail, and then she shot a bunch of photos. I ride that trail nearly every day. It's called Blue Elephant. And the spot where we were taking some photos, he actually broke out some cigars. I was like, "Bro, I don't smoke cigars." He's like, "Well, you do today." Check, light it up. Let's get after it. So there's some photos of him and I having some cigars up on Blue Elephant. And I mean, literally the day before we came here, I rode through that spot as I do nearly every day. And every time I blast through there, I smile.
Yeah.
Because I took Seb there so that I could not relive it every day. I mean, that'd be weird, but just to connect to a moment that I could shape in any way. I could have taken him anywhere.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been part of my daily sort of baseline check-in or whatever you want to call it. I mean, if you take someone out in the middle of nowhere that you've never gone before and you'll never go again, it's not that it's a one-time experience, but it's a fleeting moment. It's a fleeting moment that you don't ever get to relive again, except in your mind.
Yep.
But if you can put it somewhere where you can check in nearly every day, it's a little more real.
Yeah, you get to walk past it, and it brings or walk past or ride past or a drive through it or whatever that sequence is. There's lots of memories that I have in my life of things that were cool that I don't think I'll ever go near again because they're off somewhere else. Right. There were moments. My wife and I, we drove down to California from Edmonton. We took the 101, the coast road, the windy one that goes down the coast,
down through Oregon.
Yeah, beautiful
That's
road.
nice.
And there were a couple of spots where we stopped and we'd have these little moments together. And but I don't know if we're ever going to drive down there again, so I may never see that, right? But I have the memories. But it would be so much better to have that built into a daily, like, oh yeah, that was nice. Oh yeah, that was like it allows you to relive that moment.
It's not just a oh yeah, that's nice, but you can contemplate things with connection.
That's a great point. And develop the connection as well.
Yeah,
because you get to not so much relive the experience, but you get to dive into that experience. And I guess just like roasting coffee, you get to take your little taster out and be like, ooh.
Dude, 100%. That's
that.
Precisely what I do. It's like a marker that you can touch every time and learn something a little bit new from, depending on how long you want to touch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Satch says, kind of like watching The Collective. Amen. If we can provide something like that for people, I am job well done. Let's shut it down. It's good to go. We did have I had one point up here that I wanted to touch back on. Carl asked or pointed out acidity of soil and also the drying process. Traditionally, Sumatra is dried on the ground after harvest. Does that play into the overall profile of the coffee itself? Is how it's dried and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's right. So processing plays a large part in the finished product. So as an example, when we spent 6 weeks in Vietnam, I've got a photo on my phone. I could probably pull it up and show it to you, but I won't bother. And it's of both Evan and Keegan squatting down on the side of a road in Vietnam, where all the coffee beans, all the cherries are all laid out, drying in the sun on the road. And in some cases, you'd have to drive around patches of coffee beans, like literally on the tarmac road. Sometimes they'd be on tarps. Sometimes they'd be on dirt. Sometimes it'd be on tarp on the dirt. In this case, it was all coffee cherries laid out in someone's front yard. So they were just squatting down and like actually tasting them. Good thing none went up a nose because they were quite small. So yeah, the coffee can be processed a bunch of ways, and then that goes back to that how I was referencing Ethiopian natural versus like a Guatemalan washed. So washed coffee, as an example, when we were at in Costa Rica, La Manita, at that plantation, they wash their coffee, so it'll get harvested, and the harvesting process is just kind of like a fine grape, a fine wine.
Mm-hmm.
There's a timeline, a window of opportunity when it's like pick now. That's it. That's all. It's not like, oh, we've got 27 days to pick this crop. If you want to get select, then it's pick now. And so it's massive manpower, hand picking, and then they're sorted out. So the coffee pickers are responsible to only pick the perfect coffee cherry, and then not pick any floaters or stinkers or any bad cherries that are immature or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're picked, and then they are floated down a water channel, and they'll be processed. So bad coffees will rise, they'll be skimmed. The other coffees, they'll tumble down a big trough. They'll go through a whole bunch of processing routines. And then in some cases, they'll be left in big vats of water to ferment or to shed their coffee cherry, the pulp of the fruit, until there's just the beans. So washed and natural are quite different things. The natural, as an example, can be picked, laid out in the sunshine so that it shrivels, like I was trying to reference it, as a raisin. And what that does is that brings in more sugars into the coffee bean itself. And so that cellular matrix, when it's first picked, is kind of like it's open to suggestion, if you will, from the sugars that are naturally wrapped around it. And over time and fermenting, as an example, Elkin Guzman, it's an orange bourbon strain, Hydro Honey Natural. This will start getting a little funky, a little almost like alcoholic in its processing. And he also processes kind of aerobically or anaerobically. So there's lots of different experimental processes that can stack up with washed or dry, for lack of a better term. And I've seen most of them, and it does have a big impact on the coffee bean for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just pick and process. Then it's got to get transported. And so, as an example, when I get back to Roslyn, fingers crossed, within a couple of days, I'll be getting 4 different Nariño coffees from Colombia, which I've already cupped, already bought, and I'm already looking forward to. And so those coffees in that area of Colombia, Nariño, it's a bit dodgy. And so Frank Torres actually bought a Frank Torres from that region. So I'll be roasting some of his new stuff. It's a Maricatura strain. It's got to get processed from their town, and it's a bit of a travel. Strider, down. And so the idea being the longer it's on the road, or the different heat and cold cycles that it's facing when it's being transported. If it's being thrown on a big container ship out on the ocean for 4 months, it all depends on how it got there. If it's on a pack mule from the highlands of Ethiopia down to a processing station, and then onto a boat, and then onto, sometimes it's flowing, sometimes it's all kinds of things. So the getting it to me, actually more correctly, getting it to my importer, and then my own importer getting it to me, all of these steps have impact on the coffee bean for sure.
I was just thinking that, like, if they were to fly a giant, satchel of of coffee beans that were just basically processed, the pressure differences and the temperature differences will start to affect the bean, right? So, like, if it was to fly in the cargo hold, it's not.
It's true, and so it will, and same with on a ocean trawler or an ocean vessel, it'll start taking on the air
That's right.
salty air, of course.
Yeah.
So it'd be less so flying green bean, but flying roasted bean has more impact. So when I
Mm,
fly anywhere with coffee, I notice a difference when I land for sure.
interesting.
Mhm.
What kind of let's say someone were just they listen to this and they're like, "Man, coffee has some depth I didn't know about." How do where would they start to get into, like, if they wanted to really develop their coffee game, if they wanted to say, "You know what? I want to start where would they start? How would they
Yeah,
get into it?"
same as I mentioned to the other guy, and as I mentioned to everyone when they ask me anything about coffee, is James Hoffman.
Mhm.
James Hoffman on YouTube. I first bumped into him. I actually spoke with him. He wouldn't remember, of course. He was a super young kid, scrawny, pimply faced kid from London, competing at a SCAA competition way back in the day at a world championship. And he's since gone on to become extremely knowledgeable about coffee. And as far as I'm concerned, he's my baseline SMEs, the subject matter expert for coffee. I send everyone in his direction. He's covered a lot of material. I really like his science-minded approach. He's a detailed oriented guy with a boatload of experience, a boatload of connections, and a really, really curious mind. He does a lot of experimentations with coffee extraction techniques and beverages and whatnot. He's not a guy who creates content to just create content.
Mm,
He's a smart guy, tons of experience, thinks in a unique way, puts out a good product. He'll teach anyone a thing or two about coffee.
awesome. Now, here's a random question, I guess. Not really random, but what is your preferred style of coffee? Like, if you could choose one and you had to drink that for the rest of your life, would it be the pour overs? Would it be the espresso? Would it be,
Pour
what
overs
pour overs?
all day, every day. Yeah, I mean, I don't honestly, I don't even know how many espresso shots I've pulled in my life. A lot.
A couple.
Um, yeah, way more than pour overs, that's for sure. But I love pour over. I love the clarity, the transparency, the insight as to what the farmer was trying to produce and what the roaster was trying to produce.
Mhm.
If it's my roast, obviously I know what I did. But if it's another roaster's, I'm trying to figure out that as well. So a pour over will, I believe, give anyone the greatest insight as to what that coffee is all about. If
Mm.
you use a good technique when you're doing a pour over.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. I probably am, but the pour over is a specific, a measured amount of ground coffee, a measured amount of specific temperatured water, and then it's just through a coffee filter into the cup directly, right?
Generally speaking, that's right. But I'll say this, that what you just described, it should be the same for every form of extraction technique. So all of your variables should be controlled. So the weight, the grind, the temperature, the volume, the time, all of these things should be controlled. And so on the pour over as the example, I do about a 15 to 1 ratio, sometimes a 16 to 1 ratio. So what I mean by that is if I'm using 18 grams of coffee beans, then I'm going to use 270 grams of water. So
Mm.
15 to 1 ratio. So that's going to provide a certain amount of, you can test if you've done a good extraction based on the, for lack of a better term, osmolality or the density of the coffee, or
Mm.
you can read it through a Brix reading for sugar sweetnesses. You can get your super nerd on, but all of that to say that a 15 to 1 ratio on a pour over, and your temperature, depending on whether it's high grown, low grown, the light or dark roast, etc. I think if you kind of hang out in a 203-degree Fahrenheit sort of temperature for your water, and then you're on the watch. A slow pour with a certain timing to end at a certain point. Um, yeah, I mean, there's science involved. The more attention you pay to the detail of things, the more you can make it a consistent product over a period of time so that you can then start trending out. Oh, a month ago my coffee sucked, but this month it's getting better because of dot dot dot.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I remember, growing up out in the country where I would watch people take a percolator, just like an old school coffee thing, fill it up in the stream, put it on the water, throw a chunk of ground coffee in there, and wait.
Yeah.
And then it
I
was
mean, that
done.
was coffee. And today, coffee is coffee. And 30 years from now, coffee will be coffee. But the coffee of 30 years ago, there'll be more nuance. There'll be
Yeah.
new extractions. There'll be molecular devices that
Mm.
instantaneously through vibration bring the coffee up to spec or whatever. I mean, who knows what'll be showing up coming down the pipeline, but it'll still be coffee, but it'll suck 30 years from now if the person who is brewing that coffee is not
Yeah.
paying attention.
Yeah.
You can have the best coffee in the world, but if you're not in, if you don't have your head in the moment, if you're not in the game, I mean, go down to Tim Hortons and buy yourself a double double.
Yeah. I think
But
this
if
is
you want to get in the game, if you want to pay attention, if you want to make it all that it can be, well, it's a fun game.
this is I mean, you and I both had this where you get the giant black coffee percolator out in the field, or just the quick pour over from the army, which is just like the worst coffee you can imagine. That it's just but sometimes that's what you need, or sometimes that's all that's available. But the key, I think, is that I know lots of people out on the ranch that think they're great shots with a rifle, and they are in their realm, right? They can pick
Yeah,
up the rifle
on
and
the
bang,
farm.
nail a gopher, done, right? But there's a difference between that and being a sniper, right? And there's science and development and skill sets and stacking and
Levels.
all levels to the game, right? And so when we started talking about coffee, this is kind of the point I wanted to bring across, was the fact that everything has levels to the game. Everything. So if you think that you are at the top of the game, if you think you're the SME, you're the SME, I'm pretty sure there's another level above you.
Oh yeah. I mean, James Hoffman, that dude is forgotten more than I'll ever know. So yeah, I mean, go find people like that.
Yeah. And then dedicate yourself to it, I think, is the other part of it. Because again, I could sit down with a coffee with you, with one of your coffees, and it would be a different experience than if I just had your coffee beans at my house.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's a dedication required in order to see that next level, in order to get to that next level, and then another level of dedication to get to the next level above that.
Oh yeah.
So I
But
think
it
that's
shouldn't be drudgery, and that's the point, I suppose, is, if you want to get into the coffee game or the fitness game or the being all that you can be game, whatever. I mean, you got to commit. You got to find a way to make it a game. You got to make it fun. If you want to seek the next level, it shouldn't feel like, no way do I want that next level. It should feel like, oh yeah, bring that next level.
yeah. See, and I'm just getting there right now with a few of my different things. I finally got my bike back out, so I'm getting back into riding, and I tried to.
Dude, you'll be Evil Knievel by this summer.
I should be, hopefully.
Yeah, you will.
I gotta get some riding time in, because it doesn't feel the same as when I used to ride. Because I used to do a lot of downhill, and I used to do a lot of like jumping and trials and anything I could get my hands on where I could go over stuff and around things, and lots of speed. And I don't feel the same about it anymore when I'm on the bike. So now I got to find a new realm to engage on my
You'll
bike.
figure it out. It takes more than one ride in
Oh, for sure.
47 years. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's been funny thing is, I got this bike because my previous 3 bikes had been stolen.
Oh wow.
And in a row. It was pretty painful, and I was at the point where I was like, you know what? Maybe I should just not have a bike. Just keep getting taken from me. So we went out and got this one, and then all of last summer was, I was going to say lost, but my priority was getting my house sold and getting moved, and I wasn't thinking about writing, so I didn't really touch it at all last year. And I got on it for the first time yesterday, no, 2 days ago, and I was like, ooh, I need to do this more.
Well, it won't do it itself.
That is very true. I mean, otherwise it would just get, I'd have lots of skill sets over the years, but I don't have those anymore. And I got to rebuild those skill sets. I tried to do off a little, what is it? The little curb, at the intersection, just tried to get a little hop off the end of it. And I was just like, it didn't work the way I wanted it to. And I was like, I got to rebuild some muscles and reintegrate some pieces that I used to have that I don't have anymore. So, any other points on coffee or moments or anything we've been talking about? I don't really have.
But my wife is impatiently marching back and forth, arranging the hotel room to get us out of here a bit sooner. So we can sum up sooner rather than later.
We can shut her down, no problem. Any final points for today, or for anybody out there watching? Anything that they can do better through the day to be better?
Just to try to stay in the coffee theme on how to become better. If no one knows how to become better at coffee, well, guess what? There's these things called subject matter experts located in your town, baristas. You go to a good coffee shop, not a bad coffee shop, a good coffee shop. Don't go to Tim Hortons and ask for any advice. Go find a funky little coffee shop that's making good coffee, like actually making pour overs. Talk to the staff, see what their recommendations are. Just hang out with them, chat, watch what they do, ask them why they do it. Get curious about coffee, but don't get curious at Tim Hortons. Go get curious at a coffee shop that's actually doing pour overs, and you'll start learning. You might get interested in it. The next thing you know, maybe you're buying a bag of beans from them and you're swapping stories back and forth about, well, I tasted this, but I didn't taste that. How do I taste that? So interact with people who are subject matter experts in your town, for lack of a better title.
I like that. Elevate your game by finding people who are on the next rung up, and then keep working.
For sure.
I like that a lot. All right. Well, while we learn about more coffee and we build our palate, we can grow our appreciation of coffee in and of itself, and we can do that every day here on The Collective. See y'all tomorrow. Chimo.